We've obviously been getting a lot of news about Avowed recently. We went from last year where it was one video, one interview, and then it was crickets for 6+ months. But now in 2024, we're getting plenty more footage. We're getting interviews with the director, Kerry Patel, and despite all that, I had the general feeling that most people were less excited for the game now than they were even when it was first announced. They're not really making the best of impressions. Now, that said, I thought the game had absolutely no fans. Pretty much no one was excited for this. It was hard to find people being enthusiastic. I think I might have been wrong about that, because since then a lot of people have been pushing back against that criticism. They're looking forward to the game, and I don't think it's purely because of what they've actually seen. I think some of them are fans of Obsidian, and they are just expecting great things for that reason because of the developer. So I want to speak about some of those defenders and maybe just have a look at some of their arguments. And I also want to go over what Kerry Patel, the game director, has been saying in interviews over the last couple of days. There's a little bit of new info that's gone out there. What I want to say firstly with Avowed is I am not really excited by it. I haven't seen anything that excites me, and I don't really try and go into these upcoming games and hate on them from the start. Normally, there is a reason. I mean, I'm skeptical sometimes, but there's usually a few reasons for that. The biggest one for me is, what did the developer release last time? I'm not talking about what they released 15, 20 years ago. What was their last game, or at least last major game? Because I will say with Obsidian, they did release Pentiment, which is a very good title. I don't think it's really indicative of the direction of the studio, given it was made by a very small team, Josh Sawyer and a handful of other devs. But that was kind of the old school game development style, where you get a few nerds in a room, they're passionate, they make the game they want to make. It's unfortunate that that is so rare these days. And I mean, if Pentiment was this huge AAA game and it was that quality, I'd probably be excited for Avowed. But unfortunately, Obsidian's bigger projects, they haven't really been like that. The last major one is the Outer Worlds, and I just found that to be pretty mediocre. And I think that was made in such a way where nothing really went wrong with it. They had Tim Kaine, the creator of Fallout, working on it, experienced game director, very experienced developer, and they did sort of what they wanted to do. It just wasn't really a memorable game, and I was excited for that. I wasn't looking at that with skepticism like I am doing with Avowed. I thought it was going to be fantastic, the way they marketed it. It's going to be like Fallout meets Firefly. Oh, you're going to be making choices. We're getting back to it. Good dialogue systems, all the old school RPG roots. But then it released, and while it sort of ticked boxes, like on paper, it did all the things that you might like in an RPG, it was just kind of lacking the soul. It just didn't really have in it what I really enjoyed in the original Fallouts. Or even something like New Vegas, that had a fair bit of passion. It was a fantastic game. That, to me, is sort of golden era Obsidian. So that is a major reason for skepticism from me, is that the Outer Worlds is Obsidian's last major game, and I don't think it was that great. And that, again, smooth production. Avowed has not had a smooth production. It's gone through development hell to some extent. It has had multiple game directors, many people coming and going. Just feels a little bit odd. And I'm going to address some of that in a second, because the development hell, we know a little bit about that. So I will speak to that too, but the other reason I'm not really looking forward to it is I've just used my eyes. I've seen the trailers that they've shown, I've listened to what the devs have been saying, and nothing really grabs me at all. And when you fail to market the game and actually get me excited through 1 or 2 minutes of footage, it's like, well, what's the rest of the game going to be like? You can't even find 2 minutes worth of entertaining footage. You can't put that together. What's going on? And I will say this, there are exceptions to that rule. There are games that were marketed poorly and ended up being incredible. Prey by Arcane is an example. Before it came out, I was looking forward to it because Arcane at that stage had a good track record. This was well before Redfall, even though Redfall was actually the game this team made after Prey, so maybe I should have been a little bit skeptical of the team in general. But what happened with Prey is it was kind of marketed as, I think like an action game from memory. I don't remember them really saying, hey, this is a big immersive sim. It's going to be everything you've been wanting since System Shock 2. All the Bioshock fans, they should have been excited about it. But it was really just shown as this action game. I can't really remember any of the trailers or anything they were saying that was getting me totally excited. And then it releases. For me, it's one of the best games of all time. It's one of the best immersive sims of all time. And if they had have really pushed that, and I mean, Bioshock, so many people love that series. We haven't had one in a long time. And they weren't even pushing it towards Bioshock fans. I don't even personally think Bioshock's the best immersive sim ever, but some people really like it. And they really could have pushed those similarities. It's odd that they didn't. And I feel that is an example of failed marketing when the game is actually great. Now, I think that only really happens 5% of the time. 5% of the time, the game's good and the marketing lets you down, and you see it, you think it looks crap, but the game's actually good. In 95% of cases, if the marketing looks bad, then the game is probably bad. It's kind of like a comedy movie where there's a trailer and there's nothing funny in the trailer, all the jokes are bad. It's like, well, what's in the movie if you can't even put together enough good jokes to fill up 2 minutes in the trailer? So that's how I kind of feel sometimes with video games. So it's simply looking at it. It's not just, oh, I'm going to turn this on and look at how bad it is. I hope this is bad so I can talk. It's not really that, because I hope that we get more good RPGs. Like Baldur's Gate 3, I want to see more of them come into the mainstream because it's clear people want them. We've seen Baldur's Gate sell 25 plus million copies. The market is there, you've just got to make a good game. You can't make a middling game that's acceptable on paper like the Outer Worlds. It's got to get people talking. It's got to get the word of mouth happening. Now, I try and be somewhat consistent with this. When I look at Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines 2, when I look at Starfield, Avowed has many of the same problems to me. It's made by a studio that's past its prime. The people working on this, they're not really that experienced with RPGs. I mean, Kerry Patel, who's the game director, yeah, she's worked on Pillars of Eternity and she's done some work on the Outer Worlds, but she is, at the end of the day, a writer. She's not really, from what I can tell, a master of RPG systems, and that's her passion. It seems to be the writing side, and maybe she does some work on this game that is quite good from the writing perspective, but when you don't have the likes of, say, Tim Kaine, who did work on the Outer Worlds, just people like that who have made something great in the past, I think it's fine to be somewhat skeptical. It doesn't mean these people don't have a creative backbone and they're going to put something special together. Maybe this is their chance to shine. It is possible, but when you combine that with what we've seen, it's just not very promising to me. And just on the mention of Starfield, I don't think people were harsh enough on it, especially before release. I was kind of excited. I assumed they wouldn't drop the ball because I saw it as the follow-up to Fallout 4, not the follow-up to Fallout 76. I thought they were totally different teams. I thought Todd had it in him to at least create a nice exploration game, even if it was lacking on the RPG front. But that was not the case at all. If anything, it was the opposite. The RPG stuff, it was slightly better than Fallout 4, but it had no exploration. So before the game came out, everyone was kind of excited, even though the footage that they showed was not very good. There was actually nothing they presented that was great, but I put that down to, oh, well, the engine's a little bit old, it might not be a graphics powerhouse, but surely what we get's gonna be good, guys, surely. But no, I should have used my eyes then and realized they're not really showing anything very exciting. It doesn't seem like the game's gonna be like the Bethesda titles from the past. I wasn't really consistent. I just got hyped, I was a bit of a fanboy, and I was let down. I don't want to make that mistake with Avowed. I don't think I'm being overly negative for the sake of it. I just want to be pessimistic because I've been burned in the past. I don't think there's anything too exciting here. And to kind of address what some of the defenders of the game have been saying, some of what I see raised is this comparison to Skyrim. So there's been talk previously about, oh, is Avowed going to be Obsidian's next Skyrim? And then some people's defense to that, when the news sort of broke, oh, the game's not going to be like Skyrim, it's going to be more like the Outer Worlds, it's going to have those hub worlds, similar to other games, like maybe Dragon Age, Mass Effect, Knights of the Old Republic, many others, Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines 1. But the problem there is that people have started to say, well, it doesn't need to be like Skyrim, what are you talking about? Who cares? Not every game has to be an open world. Now, I agree with that. I don't think that every game needs to be an open world. I'm not even sure that that would be Obsidian's strength. I mean, Fallout New Vegas, it's a fantastic game. Is it great purely because of the open world? I don't really think so. I mean, the freedom is very good, but I don't think that the actual world outside of the main settlements, the main points of interest, is really special or anything. I think it comes down to the characters, the factions, everything else. Bethesda probably have done better open worlds than Obsidian. I think that is fair to say, Fallout included. But the issue with that is that's not really an honest argument. People aren't salty because the game isn't like Skyrim. Their concern is that Obsidian originally talked about it being like their Skyrim, and then they changed their tune. It seems like the game got watered down or something, or they ran into too many problems, and they kind of had to scale the game back. And that's what I talk about when I say the development hell. The game has gone through multiple game directors. It's never a good sign. I've clowned on Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines 2 many times on this channel for that reason. Because Bloodlines 2 had multiple studios, failings, now it's coming out, but because of so many years of dev time have kind of been lost, it feels like they're now rushing it out the door because the publisher of Bloodlines 2 has spent and wasted so much money, and that's part of why I question what the quality of that game is going to be. There's the big announcement, by the way, tomorrow, the extended gameplay showcase, so look forward to that. But when it comes to Avowed, again, multiple game directors, how long have they been working on this iteration? Because games these days, they just take a long time to make, especially if you're focused on graphics. And Avowed looks okay. I'm not really vibing with the style. It feels a bit fakey. It's got that generic kind of Unreal Engine look. It doesn't look very passionate, I suppose, in terms of art. But the real point about them sort of comparing or pitching it as Skyrim, Obsidian Skyrim, and then them running into all those issues, now having to do something different, it's just concerning to me because it seems like it's just had a bad run. They've had all of these troubles, and it just very rarely seems to result in a good game. So that's my concern. Not that it isn't going to be an open world Skyrim, it's just that how this has happened means that there have been a lot of development problems, changing directions, and who knows, they can't work on it forever unless Microsoft literally going to give them infinite dollars and they can just keep going until they get it exactly right. It suggests to me the game might be half-hearted. They've got to release something, too much money has been spent, and maybe we get a bit of a half-assed game that has little bits of it, maybe parts of the game from the first director, a bit more from the second, and now Kerry Cattell has to sort of cobble all of this together. Development hell is just never a good thing for a video game. That's how I feel. And for those who are trying to say, I've seen this as well, they've tried to suggest that it's only the fans putting the Skyrim expectation on Avowed. Not true. This is an article from about a year ago, an interview that the CEO at Obsidian did, where he does mention, and yes, it turns out that was the plan, at least at first. Originally, we were pitching, in essence, our Skyrim with Avowed, confirms the Obsidian CEO in an interview. Now, he kind of does damage control after that. He starts talking about how, Obsidian make great linear RPGs. Sure, you can make your choices, but the actual areas are a little bit more linear. They might be those hub worlds that we've spoken about. They don't really make open world games. That's all totally fine. If you had have said that as the first thing, if you had have released the Avowed trailer, people said, hey, that looks like Skyrim, can you climb that mountain, can you do this? And they had have just said, no, that's not what this game is, we're doing something different. I would have been 100% fine with that. The issue is that they genuinely went into it wanting it to be like Skyrim. They had their own problems. They couldn't really do it sounds like, and they had to scale it all back. So it sounds like they sort of failed at their first iteration, and they had to somewhat start again, and then they're doing a bit of damage control, because it's like, hey, we tried to sell you on this Skyrim-like, and now we're doing something different, much more like the Outer Worlds. So for me, that's just not super promising. If it had have been different from the start, it would have been okay, but it sounds like they just ran into these issues, and that's just going to affect the game when it eventually comes out. So that was an older interview, but there have been some newer ones since then over the next couple of days. These articles, man, they're a bit of a pain because you'll get some like suck up, like the writer or the publisher of the article who just keeps sucking up to the game, sucking up to Xbox. So you got to sort of find the good material, because anything that the writer has said, it's a little bit nauseating. They say, in combat narrative and exploration, Avowed is dialing the choice factor up to 11. Wow. Obsidian didn't say that. This is just the article writer who's really pushing this for some reason. So what I'm more interested in is the quotes from the game director, Kerry Patel. So for interested, there's one here, and this is kind of about choice and consequence within Avowed. I've been skeptical of that because the way they presented the first quest they were willing to show, it just seemed like a run-of-the-mill quest. All they did was show dialogue. We sort of teleported from the first person you speak to back to another person, and you just went through a couple of lines of dialogue. Didn't look particularly interesting. You only had 2 or 3 dialogue choices. Nothing about it was exciting. It was hard to kind of follow what was even going on with the quest. It was just kind of boring. But it's like, why are you sort of pushing that like this is this huge thing that you can do a quest? My worry is there's not going to be that many quests. It's going to be a heap of combat, which is most of what they've shown. There's going to be a few quests scattered around. That's actually supported by the setting. I'm not a Pillars of Eternity expert, but from what I understand, where it is set within the world of Aora is kind of like a wilderness. There's not going to be huge sprawling cities or anything. I think there's going to be one city. We don't know the size of that, and then there might be some little settlements scattered around. So I'm just worried it's heaps and heaps of combat, not a lot of quests and choices, which is why people look forward to Obsidian games. Their combat has not usually been a massive strong suit. However, the people making it, one of the gameplay director, for instance, all his experience is in combat-focused games. It's not really in role-playing games. So all these little things are like red flags to me. It makes me skeptical. But this quote from Kerry Patel, I think it's about looking for lots of opportunities to have those choices pay off. And knowing that some of those payoffs will be big, and some of them will be more subtle, but in a way that feels believable, and that will then feel especially rewarding for players who find them, says Kerry Patel. And I think the thing you always have to accept when you're building an RPG like this, or designing choice and consequence, is that most players are not going to discover 100% of what you've built for them. Now, when I read this, it made me think of a Tim Cain video. Again, mentioned him earlier, the creator of Fallout. He posts a lot of great videos online about game development, and something he said is that when traditional writers transition to game development, specifically role-playing games, it can be difficult for them. And that is the case with Kerry Patel. She was previously just a writer of, I believe, novels, and she transitioned into game development. Probably because these days, game development is still a steadier paycheck than trying to flog your book, trying to sell your book. It's hard these days to print books like that and have any sort of success. So the issue writers like this seem to have is when they're writing linear stories, beginning, middle, and end, and then they have to design quests, design a game where it's not really like that. You have to allow people to go in their own direction. You also shouldn't really be the moral arbiter where you make one choice the right kind of choice. It could be morally right, but I'm talking the developer wants you to go down that path. And all the good content, all the good story is down that one path. If you choose the other option, it just kind of ends the quest and you get nothing. It shouldn't be like that in an RPG. No game's going to be perfect and get it all 100% right, but you should at least have many moments where no matter what option you choose, it's interesting. It has its own unique pathway. And it sounds like from this line, maybe Kerry Patel is having some sort of trouble with that. I mean, I would just think that an RPG developer who's really passionate, it would not be a concern at all that they're not going to discover 100% of what you've built. That is actually part of the experience. That's why you want to make an RPG, because you're excited about seeing people go down these different directions, experience unique things. Now, she might think that. Maybe it's just the way she said it. I've interpreted it this way, but it is something that stuck out to me, especially with what Tim Cain had been saying. And she continues here and says, when we're designing a game like this, we always want to keep in mind 2 extremes of players. You have the player who they maybe get 30 minutes to game after work, maybe after taking care of the kids before they need to go to bed, start the next day of work. So you want to make sure that journal entries are clear. Players always know where the fun is, and they can pick up the game and have a good time with however little or however much time they have available to them in the moment. But then we also have a lot of players that we know will explore every corner of the world, pick apart every detail, and it is so much fun to leave surprises and nuggets, and things that we think, oh, the people who find this are really going to get something out of it, or we know we're going to get a Reddit thread about this detail when someone's find it. Now, this is slightly odd to me, just because I don't really understand why in a single-player game you've got to think about people who only have 30 minutes to play. Now, if this was World of Warcraft, if it was an MMO where it's like a second job, I could understand that design clash, where there's people playing all day, people who've only got half an hour to jump into it, and then they've got to take a break. But a single-player game, why does it matter? If you've got 30 minutes to play, and I don't think Avowed's going to be an 100-plus hours sprawling RPG, it's probably going to be maybe 30, 40, 50 hours at the most, let's be real. And that's totally fine, not every game's got to be bloated. However, if you've only got 30 minutes to play, that's still 2 or 3 months of playtime, which is totally fine. There's plenty of people playing Baldur's Gate 3, other titles, Elden Ring, they chip away at it, and they probably enjoy it. They get so much out of their $60, $70 they've spent because it entertains them for 2 or 3 months when they get the chance to play. Do those people want the game to be changed to accommodate them? I don't really know why that has to be anything. Whether you play a single-player game for 5 hours in a row or 30 minutes, I've never seen where there's got to be a big difference. She does mention journal entries. Yeah, I mean, that's fine, but again, I don't think it has to be anything to do with people who've only got a small window to play at one time, because people might play heaps for a couple of weeks, then something else comes out, they might take a break and come back to it. So those journal entries should really always be clear. They should summarize why you're doing what you're doing. It shouldn't just be a generic, go over there for this quest. It should tell you, like it does in games like Cyberpunk, for instance, where it has Johnny Silverhand summing up details about the quest. That's kind of cool. Anything like that should just be there, regardless of who's kind of playing the game. I think what she's really saying, but she doesn't sort of come out and say it, is there's casual players and then supposedly more hardcore players. And maybe she's kind of saying, hey, we've got to dumb the game down to some extent for the mainstream. And again, I think that's kind of outdated design, because Baldur's Gate again, and I'm only using Baldur's Gate as an example most of the time because it's a mainstream hit and most people are familiar with it. But you can apply this to any other RPG that's a success. I mean, the Pathfinder series has done pretty well. There's been many other indie games that have pushed above their weight. Kingdom Come Deliverance, plenty of good titles, but I'll use Baldur's Gate for now. Just to say that these games, they might have had some mainstream appeal attached to them, things put in the game to generate more mainstream interest, but I don't think that they were super dumbed down. Obsidian, I believe, have made a mistake where they think, oh, these RPGs, they're too confusing for people, let's dumb them right down so any idiot can enjoy them. It worked for Bethesda, it'll work for us as well. But that's clearly a mistake. People don't want that. And again, that's why this 30 minutes to game after work is silly. There's people who've gamed for a long time, they understand video games very well, but now they do have families, and they just don't have as much time. It doesn't mean they want a game that's dumbed down and it's just totally brainless. They're still interested in an in-depth game, they're just going to play it at their own pace. This idea that you've got to change the game design for people who only have a short window each day, it's only really for things like MMOs, these live services. You don't need to change the design, and that's why I think this is an excuse, because the game is probably going to be watered down to some degree, and they're not wanting to admit that. They're trying to come up with justifications. I could be looking into that wrong. I'm trying to find some of these red flags in here just because these articles are mostly sucking up to the game. Most of the text, which I've skipped, is just generic fluff where they say, Avowed, again, choices up to 11, you could do so much, it's incredible. So at least I want to find some real content in here, something that might actually be interesting to people. In this interview, they also talk about choice and consequence in combat, and we've got a line here. At Obsidian, it's your world, your way, right, says gameplay director Gabe Paramo. We want to give the player the freedom with the dual-wielding system. You know, with combinations, or combinatorics, as I call it, what? People make fun of me for using this term. It's being able to put a pistol in my right hand and a shield in my offhand. I'm blocking and I'm firing. It's the choice and consequence with things like, I'm using a dagger that's quick and it's more silent, and I'm using a pistol that's loud and has a little bit of a recovery reload time. Now, my only concern here is if they really push choice and consequence, but then that relates to combat 99% of the time. I know there's some examples of quests, but if it turns out, yeah, there's choice and consequence, but we're talking about your loadouts and the weapons you use and things like that, the skill tree. If that's it, it's going to lose a lot of my interest because, again, Obsidian's not really known for their combat prowess. It's mostly acceptable in their games. Fallout New Vegas, again, is the combat good? Not really. And that's partly because of Bethesda's engine. It's just never been good. Fallout 3, Fallout New Vegas, it's pretty similar. But it's made up for by everything else, by the characters, the factions, the paths that you can go down. If in Avowed, it's mostly combat-related choices, it's only going to work if the combat feels really good. If it's just kind of brainless, where regardless of the build you've got, it's still really easy to get through, I know you can put it on a harder difficulty, but often that feels like an afterthought because they know only a handful of players are going to really crank up that difficulty. So it ends up being something like, oh, the enemies have more health, you have less health, and it doesn't really change how you play. The Outer Worlds had some of that, I believe. I can't remember if it was like a mod later or even a patch later, where they actually made it more crucial that the ammo types you used and the enemies, like you had to actually plan that. You couldn't just go through the game with the same gun and it would be really fine like it is on maybe a normal mode. So maybe they take some learnings from that and it's better in Avowed. But again, I think a lot of people, if they learn that 90% of it, it's combat. Most of the choices are about combat. There's some quests, but that's about it. I think they are going to be disappointed regardless of how good the combat is, because they come to Obsidian for the stories. Now again, Kerry Patel, the game director, she is a writer. It would be odd if there's less narrative than in previous Obsidian games, but it's gone through development hell. Have they had enough time to really put all those stories in there, or have they just been playing catch-up? They've had to keep starting again. They can't just have this budget totally blow out, spend 10 years on it like Rocksteady Studios with friggin' Suicide Squad. It's got to come out one day, so we'll have to see. But that's why I try and use my eyes. What they've shown in trailers, there's not a lot of narrative. It has mostly been combat. A quest, they make it out like it's this huge deal, a basic choice. So I don't know, I really don't know. But what he's saying about the combat, it's fine. Maybe it'll be better than other Obsidian games. I just don't think that if it's the main draw, it's going to particularly excite me. Especially because the combat doesn't look good from what we've seen. Now, I'm going to balance this. I'll talk about something that's positive. It's fine, no issues with it. And it's this line here. There's also a system that our team is working on integrating into Avowed right now that we first had in Tyranny, and we also had it in Pillars of Eternity Deadfire. It is lore tooltips, where for a particular name or piece of lore, when it comes up in dialogue or in a piece of written text, you can kind of hover it over it and you get a little summary. Such as, what is the living lands? And then you understand it, you can read about the living lands, and it doesn't otherwise interrupt the flow of what you've been doing. Now, I remember that pretty well in, say, the Pathfinder games, which do something similar. It's a pretty cool system. I think it would be extra cool if there was something in the settings where if you've read the tooltip once, it won't show that tooltip again. It won't make it highlightable unless you want to sort of turn all of that back on. Because just what I found sometimes in, say, Pathfinder Kingmaker is you would read the lore tooltip and then maybe later on it shows up again. You can't really remember if you've read it, so you end up reading the same things over and over again because you're just not 100% sure. Maybe that's just me, but I think that would be a cool addition. Maybe it was there for Tyranny and so on, and I just didn't know about it, but that when you read the tooltip once, it won't show up again for these little lore tidbits on the living lands or whatever. If it doesn't have that, not the end of the world. I think this is a fine feature to be putting in there. Makes the game better. It's fine. However, this part was a bit laughable. Someone said, this is the article writer, by the way, I mentioned their suck-ups. And for me, Avowed is of course also an Xbox console exclusive, which means that if it does get it right whenever it lands in 2024, it could be the reason people like myself finally acquire an Xbox Series X console. I don't think anyone's going to be picking up an Xbox for Avowed. Let's be totally real. Some people probably did it for Starfield. Many of them probably regretted it. I don't think anyone that is this interested in Obsidian games either doesn't have a computer already to play the games on or doesn't already own an Xbox. I don't think Avowed is going to be moving the needle, no matter how good it ends up being. Even if it's exceeding expectations, I think at best that's still going to be like an 8 out of 10. I can't see this being an all-time classic. This is the last of these interviews, and they start to talk about the classless system in Avowed, which most people I've seen are probably not super happy with it, and for me myself, I don't think it dooms the game or anything. I've talked about them dumbing it down. This could be dumbing it down. It doesn't absolutely mean that. There have been plenty of good games where you don't choose your own class. It just depends what the reason is. If it was because, oh, we need to rush this game out and building classes, we don't have time, that would be concerning. If it was always the plan, maybe it was, given it was originally pitched as a Skyrim-like, you never know. Maybe that's the direction they just wanted to go in, but this is what they say. This is a classless system, explains Patel, the game director. There is a ton of freedom that players have in mixing and matching the combination of skills and weapons. And so I think players are going to have a really wonderful time pursuing their fantasy and their character in the world. Whether it's a very traditional, recognizable archetype, like a sword and board warrior, a two-handed weapon wielder, or something a little crazier like the gun-slinging mage. I don't mean to sound like I'm making fun of her when I'm reading it. I just get used to putting on voices when I'm reading it out. So no shade. It's all okay. Now, the article reader says, if you're like me, the lack of a combat class system in an RPG of Avowed size might sound daunting. It's the bread and butter of games like Skyrim. I don't think that you could pick a genuine class in Skyrim. It had the races, which kind of dictate your starting point, but I don't think they were really classes. So, and this tells you the mind of the author, and I mean, all he seems to be doing is sucking up to Microsoft, so who really cares what the person thinks? And he goes on to say, but all of this speaks to Avowed's determination to deliver the ultimate magical fantasy, one that incentivizes players to switch up their builds on the fly without something as restrictive as a preordained gameplay class holding them back. That's why this article just feels like marketing and like nonsense. It's fine if you like the classless system, but then you're sort of throwing shade on games that do have classes. And again, Obsidian's not saying this. It's just the idiot who's writing the article. I mean, that's ridiculous. Why does it have to restrict you? I mean, we're talking about an RPG. Replay value is meant to be a big part of these games, and if you can literally just use any build on the fly, remember you can sort of swap them, so it's not like you've had to particularly use these weapons, use these shields. It seems like you can just change your setup with a click of the button. If you can just do that, what's the point of replaying the game? How is it really going to be any different if you can just choose these combat loadouts and have anything at your disposal whenever you want to? That kind of takes away some of the choice. Now, that could be done in an interesting way, where the way that you build your character with the skill tree, that really changes it up, but I'm not 100% sure. I see sometimes there's a design direction where the game developers are worried about giving you these choices and not allowing you to change things immediately. I think if you give too much freedom with that, where it's just anytime, anywhere, I can go and speak to an NPC and totally change my class and build, yeah, I mean, it's like you could ignore that, sure. But sometimes if you lock it in, it just makes the choice a bit more powerful. But again, you can quick save, you can save scum in games and go back and change your choices. So maybe it's not a big deal. I just think the philosophy sometimes, it's okay if you make a choice and you're stuck with it. You can always replay the game. It's a single-player game, nothing stopping that. It goes on to say, in evolving the classic Skyrim-esque combat experience, Paramo also cites a desire to switch up funneling mechanics that force players to get around a combat problem in one way. He says, like, hey, here's a character that's blocking, you need to power attack that. He uses as an example, in Avowed, however, there are ways to break an enemy's blocking stance. So you can use Pull of Aura, that gets them out of the block. Or I can use Charge. So there are sorts of abilities and mechanics that funnel into a singular concept. That's a little bit more interesting than just hacking and slashing and being able to get through every combatant just by pressing one button. And that's fine as well, but again, you can't have this super low bar. If the game is genuinely all about combat, which is what it seems like from what they've shown, maybe that's not correct, but why are they presenting it that way if that's not the case, if most of it is not just sort of combat? I know there's quests, but I'm skeptical if there's that many quests, that much going on the narrative side. If it's really about combat, simply saying there's more to do than in Skyrim, which has pretty basic combat, let's be honest, that's not really going to excite people. You should be really saying the combat's incredible in this game, here's why, not just saying it's not just hack and slash, it's a little bit more than that. Come on, guys, we know what we're doing. I just don't know if they're really pushing it in such a way that's really hyping this up. It goes on to say these mechanics and abilities could be tied to the skill tree. Avowed's progression system is a point-based one that rewards you for progressing and playing through the game. Your companions and their own skills and abilities will also be upgradable, making them better and more efficient in combat, according to Paramo. Now, I don't know if that was revealed previously, that you could upgrade skills and abilities for your companions. It sounds like That's okay. We'll see how in-depth that is. Maybe it's just sort of basic things here and there. It might not be a massive feature because they haven't really shown it in footage and things, but it's still something. It's just with the skill tree, there's always that worry that they just allow you to be the master of absolutely everything. And given there's the combat loadouts, obviously you are going to be able to go down a few different paths at once. Otherwise, that probably wouldn't make sense. I assume they want you to be able to utilize all of guns, all of melee weapons and wands and things probably within the same playthrough. I don't think they're going to lock that out too much, given that it is classless. So hopefully the skill tree doesn't just feel like, here's a reward every time. Every time you level up or however it works, it's almost just like saying, we're going to give you everything now for level 2, everything now again for level 3, and it's almost predetermined. You're just going to turn into a master of everything. There's no real consequences in the skill tree, and again, it comes down to the consequence. They've talked about choice and consequence so much, I hope there is genuine consequence. It's not just a buzzword that you're trying to use because, you know, RPG fans like to hear it. It ends here in saying, Avowed is yet to receive a concrete release date outside of the broader fall 2024 window. And this person, Paramo, says, I'm just excited about being able to be more transparent as we slowly reveal more throughout the rest of this year. The internet's the internet. You're going to get positive feedback. You're going to get not as positive feedback. And to be fair, my feedback hasn't been very positive, but it's about what you've shown. If you had presented great footage, I promise I'd be praising it. And if you release something that genuinely looks good, it looks better than what you've shown, you sort of tighten things up, there's some more confidence. You're not just saying, combat's better than Skyrim, guys, and that's most of the game. If that's your marketing pitch, that's not going to sell me. So until you show more, I'm not going to be pumped. You can do a million interviews like this. Until you show it happening on the screen, I'm not going to believe it. I've been burned. Many people have been burned too many times. They're not going to accept false promises, false premises. You're going to have to do more. Again, my concerns with Avowed, they're not baseless. It's not, oh, it's the new game coming out, let's talk badly about it, that'll be cool. It is related to the red flags that we see. I've talked about the development hell. I've talked about the footage that we're seeing. If you're excited, power to you. If you're looking forward to video games, that's fine. And you might just think, you know what, I've seen it, maybe it's going to be okay, that's all I care about. I'm not going to be overanalyzing it, I'm just going to quietly look forward to it. Maybe it'll be good, maybe it won't. That is totally fine. You don't have to be a nerd like me and delve into everything and then make your decision. Do what you want to do, but I feel it's subjective looking at this, that there are problems. What they've shown, it's not really exciting people. I think most people who are pumped for it, it's just biased towards Obsidian. They've liked some previous games for them, and they're a little bit emotional about it. I've said I did that with Starfield. I was excited, even though I think Bethesda's games have been dumbed down over time. There was still that little kid in me that was kind of like, oh, it could take me back to the days of the older Fallouts, the older Elder Scrolls titles. Maybe we'll get it. We didn't, and I just don't want you to be disappointed by Avowed and have the same thing that has happened with other titles. Like maybe Cyberpunk for you when it came out, certainly Starfield, certainly Redfall if you're a fan of Arcane. So I hope it's good, but they need to prove that. They need to show something more. So thanks so much for listening. I'll see you on the next one. Cheers. Bye.